Should I imprison my stepmother and her boyfriend for abuse after my father's 25-year sentence? Life, as I knew it, crumbled the day my father was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. My name is Alex, and I'm a 16-year-old trying to navigate a world that suddenly feels alien. The day the gavel came down, sealing my father's fate, marked the end of normalcy for me. It's strange how quickly life can pivot on a single moment, thrusting you into a narrative you never asked to be part of. Before that pivotal moment, we were a typical family, or as typical as any family can claim to be. My father, a man of strong principles but perhaps too rigid in his ways, was the anchor of our household. He ran a small, local garage, a place where I spent countless afternoons after school, handing him tools or sweeping floors, basking in the mundane but comforting routine of our life. My mother, or rather my stepmom, Julia, entered our lives when I was 10. She brought a semblance of softness to our otherwise stoic home. Back then, she was the bridge between my father and me, translating his often harsh expectations into lessons of resilience and ambition. However, the tranquility of our existence was deceptive, hiding the brewing storm beneath its calm surface. My father, unbeknownst to me, had been entangled in activities far removed from the honest labor of his garage. It was a side of him that he kept well hidden, a shadowy figure that I would only come to know in the wake of his arrest. The details trickled in slowly, painting a picture of a man driven to desperate measures under the crushing weight of debt and a faltering business. He had become involved in a series of illegal dealings, a last-ditch effort to salvage his faltering garage and secure our financial future. But the law, with its indifferent gaze, sees not the desperation but the deed. And so, my father was found guilty, leaving behind a family thrust into the throes of uncertainty and public scrutiny. The immediate aftermath of his imprisonment was a blur of hushed conversations, tear-streaked faces, and the ominous silence that settled over our home. Julia, once a beacon of warmth and stability, transformed overnight. It was as if the sentencing had flipped a switch, revealing a side of her I had never known. Her affection, once freely given, became a scarce commodity, replaced by a cold detachment that left me reeling. I became the unintended recipient of her frustrations, a living reminder of the life that had crumbled around us. The household chores, once shared tasks, fell solely on my shoulders, a constant, grueling reminder of how drastically our lives had changed. It was in these moments of isolation and relentless labor that I began to question the familial bonds that were supposed to sustain us through such trials. The transformation of my stepmom, once a figure of warmth and security in my life, into someone I barely recognized was as swift as it was shocking. In the wake of my dad's imprisonment, our household, once filled with laughter and occasional arguments about trivial things like what to watch on TV or who would do the dishes, had morphed into a battleground of silence and tension. My stepmom's demeanor underwent a drastic change. Where she used to greet me with a smile in the mornings, now there was barely a nod or a grunt of acknowledgement as we crossed paths in the dimly lit hallways of our home. Before the new man came into our lives, my stepmom tried to sweeten the impending change with words dipped in honey, promising me that things would get better and that this man would bring a sense of normalcy back into our lives. She painted a picture of a future where we could all move past the shadow cast by my father's sentence, attempting to mask the bitterness of betrayal with false hope and promises. Yet, her visits to my father in prison were sporadic at best, and when she did go, it seemed more a performance for the benefit of onlookers than a genuine act of concern for the man she had married. On one such visit, when I attempted to breach the subject of her new companion, she cut me off sharply, her eyes darting around as if afraid someone might overhear the truth behind the facade she presented. Life as I knew it began to unravel the moment my father's sentence was handed down. The absence of his presence in our home was like a void that grew with each passing day, a constant reminder of the stability we once had but lost. However, nothing prepared me for the shift that occurred when my stepmom decided it was time to introduce someone new into our already fragile existence. His name was Mark, and from the very first moment I laid eyes on him, I knew there was something off. He carried himself with an unwarranted arrogance, a smirk playing on his lips as if he knew some inside joke about my life that I wasn't privy to. My stepmom was all smiles, a stark contrast to the woman who, just weeks prior, could barely muster a glance my way. "This is Mark," she introduced, her voice laced with a cheerfulness that sounded foreign to my ears. Mark extended his hand, not in a gesture of greeting but rather as if he was bestowing an honor upon me by acknowledging my existence. "So, this is the little F word you were talking about," were the first words he chose to speak, his voice dripping with disdain. The smile on my stepmom's face faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, laughing it off as though it was the most natural thing in the world to insult her stepson upon first meeting. I stood there, taken aback, not by the insult, but by the realization that this was the man my stepmom had brought into our lives, into our home, with the expectation that I would accept him. My height, which towered over his by a few inches, seemed to be the only shield I had against the diminutive nature of his character. As he walked past me to survey the house, his eyes scanned each room with a covetousness that made my skin crawl. I followed him, curious yet cautious, until he stopped abruptly, turning to face me. "You got a problem?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "Do you need help finding something?" That's when it happened. Faster than I could react, Mark reached out, grabbing my arm and twisting it behind my back in a painful grip. The shock of the sudden assault rendered me momentarily helpless, but survival instincts kicked in. With all the strength I could muster, I kicked backward, hitting him on the leg. His grip loosened just enough for me to break free, and with one more push, he stumbled backward, falling to the ground. The sound of the fall seemed to echo through the house, and within seconds, my stepmom was by our side. But instead of concern, her eyes blazed with fury directed not at Mark, but at me. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me towards the door. I tried to explain, to tell her that Mark had attacked me first, but my words fell on deaf ears. With a strength fueled by anger, she threw me out of the house, her slaps and words following me out into the cold night. "After your dad got arrested, you became nothing more than a low-level bull sh word that no one cares about," she yelled, the door slamming shut behind me, leaving me alone in the darkness. The slap from my stepmom echoed in my ears, a sound that marked the severing of whatever fragile bond we had left. My cheek stung, a physical manifestation of her betrayal and anger towards me. In a daze, I stood outside the door, my mind racing with confusion and hurt. I couldn't understand how things had escalated to this point, how the woman who had been a part of my life for so long could turn on me so quickly. I remember apologizing, my words a desperate attempt to mend the rapidly widening rift between us. "I didn't mean to." I began, but my apology was cut short by another slap, her hand striking my other cheek with a force that left me speechless. The door slammed shut, leaving me in a silence that was louder than any words could ever be. Standing there, in the cold, dark night, I called out, hoping for a semblance of reason to pierce through the madness. The door opened, but it wasn't my stepmom who answered, it was him, Mark, the man who had ignited this firestorm with his mere presence. In his hands, he clutched some of my clothes, which he threw at my feet with a disdain that made my stomach churn. His words cut through the night, each one a knife twisting deeper into my already wounded heart. He cursed me, mocked me about becoming homeless, and called me the child of a criminal, saying no one would protect me now. His laughter, gloating and cruel, filled the air, urging me to hurry up and move on. "This house is mine," he declared, as if staking his claim on a territory that was never his to begin with. The humiliation of that moment was something I had never experienced before. It was one thing to be cast out by my stepmom, but to be ridiculed and belittled by a man who knew nothing of my life, my family, or the struggles we had faced, was a different kind of pain altogether. The words "no one will protect you" echoed in my head, a chilling reminder of the isolation I now faced. As I gathered my clothes from the ground, his laughter still ringing in my ears, a sense of resolve began to form within me. Yes, I was the child of a man who was now in prison, but that did not define me. My current circumstances, as dire as they seemed, would not be the end of my story. The cruelty of Mark's words and actions only served to strengthen my determination to prove him wrong, to show the world that I was more than the sum of my family's mistakes. I wrapped the clothes around me, a meager shield against the cold, and took a step away from the house that was no longer a home. With each step, I felt a mixture of fear and defiance. Fear of the unknown, of the challenges that lay ahead, but also defiance against those who would see me fail, who took pleasure in my suffering. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and trials, but I knew I had to face them head on. I couldn't allow the words and actions of others to dictate my worth or my future. I was alone, yes, but I was also free from the toxic environment that had sought to break me, free to make my own choices and carve out my own path. As I walked, the laughter and curses faded into the background, replaced by a quiet determination. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here, in the shadow of a home that had turned its back on me. The journey would be difficult, but it was mine to make, and I would face it with all the strength I had. The cold bit into my skin, but it was the words, the betrayal, that chilled me to the bone. As I walked away from the house, the home that no longer felt like mine, I couldn't help but wonder how things had come to this. My stepmom, the woman who had been a part of my life for years, had chosen a stranger over me, had thrown me out into the night without a second thought. The walk to the police station was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions I couldn't fully comprehend. When I finally arrived, shivering and with the beginnings of frostbite nipping at my fingers, I was met with a kindness I hadn't expected. The officer at the desk listened as I recounted the events of the evening, his expression one of concern rather than judgment. He didn't question my actions, didn't blame me for defending myself. Instead, he took immediate steps to ensure my safety, offering me a place to stay until we could figure out what to do next. As I sat in the warmth of the police station, the events of the night replaying over and over in my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. My stepmom's actions had drawn a line, making it clear where her loyalties lay. The betrayal stung, leaving me with a myriad of emotions that I couldn't quite sort through. Anger, sadness, confusion, all swirled within me, creating a tumultuous storm that I had no idea how to navigate. The only thing I was certain of was that my life had taken a dark turn, one that I would have to face head on, regardless of the uncertainty that lay ahead. In the aftermath of that night, the reality of my situation began to settle in. My relationship with my stepmom, already strained by the loss of my father to the prison system, had fractured beyond repair. The home I had known, the life I had lived, had been irrevocably changed by the actions of a man I had just met and the woman who had chosen him over her own family. As I lay in the guest room of the officer's house, the kindness of a stranger providing a temporary reprieve from the chaos of my life, I couldn't help but ponder the events that had led me to this point. Was defending myself wrong? Had I somehow crossed an invisible line that justified my stepmom's actions? These questions haunted me, their answers as elusive as the sense of belonging I once felt within the walls of my own home. But one thing was clear, the path ahead would not be easy. The court appearance loomed over me like a dark cloud, a reminder of the legal and emotional battles that lay ahead. Yet, in the midst of the turmoil, there was a glimmer of hope, a faint light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. The officer's kindness had shown me that not all was lost, that there were still people in the world who cared, who saw me not as a problem to be solved but as a person in need of help. As I closed my eyes, trying to find solace in the quiet of the night, I realized that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, but it was a journey I was determined to make. For in the darkest moments of our lives, we find out who we truly are and what we're capable of. And I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I was not alone, that I had a voice, and that my story was far from over. To keep you informed on the unfolding saga of my quest for justice and the courtroom battles against my stepmother and her boyfriend, I promise to provide an update later. As the legal proceedings continue to unravel, revealing the depth of betrayal and the strength of resolve, I am eager to share the next chapter of this story. Stay tuned for the next installment, where the pursuit of justice reaches new heights, and the lessons learned along the way shine a light on the road ahead.